Omar Musa, welcome to Booktopia.
Thank you for having me.
I was wondering whether you would do this conversation all as a rap thing.
No, of course not. I feel like chatting. I can't put everything into rhythm and rhyme.
Is that the case? I mean, you know, at what point do you sort of think, I've got a rhythm there's something that I want to say and I can say it better that way?
It depends. It depends what I'm writing, you know, and the method I use to write is always different for each project. Sometimes I'm very sort of meticulous and piece it together over a long period of time. Sometimes it all just comes out of me in one wave. With the novel, there was, a little bit more sort of construction went into it. I had to
I can imagine
really
that would have
architect
been quite a sort of challenge. So can you talk about what's different about writing for the page and writing for performance?
Oh wow, writing for the page and writing for the performance. A lot of it's about the sort of sound and the pauses, and it's all of the stuff I write for the stage is only about 3 minutes long. So it's almost like, the way I describe it is, it's like creating a stained glass window that's kind of pretty to look at, and it's nice and it's delicate, and you can see each part of it, whereas writing a novel is more like building a cathedral, and it takes a lot more foresight and kind of madness as well in forging forward and keeping yourself disciplined and not, slitting your throat.
But I'm just wondering about something that I think is a trademark of you as a hip-hop artist. I first saw you in Bali. I saw you perform there at the Writers' Festival. And what I loved was your intensity and your passion. How do you harness passion and intensity on the page? Because you've done that in this book. But I'm just wondering what the technique is for doing that.
I think you just have to rev yourself up and be fearless and try to see through things to the true heart of the kind of human condition and the human experience, and not lose your nerve, basically. Just be willing to go to those really dark places, and sometimes when you're confronted by the abyss, you have to just leap into it recklessly. And that's what I've tried to do with this, and it takes a lot from you. It's really, really difficult to do, and it drove me mad, and I had little breakdowns all the time, because with a poem or a rap you can kind of just do that in a day, or I could write that in a day, and then I've sort of felt a certain sense of catharsis doing that, whereas this, it's over 2.5 years, so you're having to go to that place again and again and again in order to do justice to the story, and that's really difficult.
So let me ask you something, because it seems to me that a lot of what I hear in hip-hop and rap is fueled by anger, and anger can be a very positive fuel for a lot of writers.
Sure.
Has anger been an important motivational force for you, either as a performer or in writing this?
I think so, but I think it's a positive thing to be able to turn anger into something redemptive, just through the mere act of writing and performing, instead of going out and bashing someone or setting fire to something, as some of the characters in the book end up doing.
Exactly.
But I think the book was definitely fueled by anger about the state of Australian politics, Australian society. It was fueled by melancholy as well. I think that's something that is sort of a theme that goes throughout my work. But I think I naturally lean towards the darker things, but I think it's important to try to find redemption in amongst all these stories and a little bit of light. Otherwise there's sort of no point if it's all just completely dark. So I'm always looking for the light in the darkness a little bit somewhere, even though I lean towards the darkness.
Tell me about the central character Solomon and how you conjured him up. Who is he?
Solomon is a guy in his late 20s, a bit of a drifter who goes in and out of relationships. He's always been naturally very charismatic, people are drawn to him, but he's just floated through life. There was a certain point when he had all the skills, he was great at sport, very smart, he was at uni, but then he just sort of decided to let all that go and just drift through the world. And so I guess each of the central characters, you find them at a crisis point in their lives, at a crossroads where they're trying to figure out what the hell they're going to do with themselves. And so, it's about a guy who feels powerless to control his life in certain ways, and that he hasn't achieved his full potential. And his father died at a time when he had a really bad injury in basketball, and he's trying to figure out how to find redemption in his life and how to find solid relationships. So that's Solomon Musa. And a lot of people assume that he is me. And also even the last name, Musa, is similar to Musa. I don't know, that must have been a subconscious thing. But he's not me, you know, he's a fictionalized guy that I created in my head, that I wanted to be an outsider amongst outsiders. And that's sort of why I chose a Samoan character, a Macedonian character, people of quite small minorities. But the point is that despite being part of these minorities, their stories are important and they're complex and they're human beings. They shouldn't just be brushed over. And oftentimes I think we do that in Australian society. We look at our neighbours and just see the stereotype instead of trying to look at them as complex human beings. So that's what I was trying to do with the book. And these hip-hop characters, hip-hop gets a bad rap oftentimes, and I kind of hate that. People aren't willing to look beneath the surface, and that's what I want to do.
What are you trying to say, do you think, in this book about Australian masculinity right now? Because that's pretty complex, I think, in this book.
Yeah, it was a difficult one because I wanted to show a kind of warped type of masculinity, aggressive and destructive sexuality in the book, and masculinity and impotence that leads to destructiveness. But at the same time, and frustration as well, coming from any number of sources. A lot of them being, feeling disenfranchised as a new migrant or the son or child of new migrants in Australia. But at the same time, I had to be careful because I want to make these characters very flawed, show all their flaws, but also show them as human beings with a good side as well. So it's not as if they're just these horrible, violent, misogynistic, sexist bastards, but they've actually got light to their characters as well. So I wanted to show all of that, the messiness of it all, basically. I think this book is about chaos, because a bushfire is pure chaos, and everything is rendered equal in front of a bushfire. So I wanted to show the chaotic nature of Australian society and its combustibility, and how there's all these things rubbing up against each other, class and gender and race, and no one's really got the answers. It's just this chaotic morass.
It's sort of tinderbox.
It's a tinderbox, yeah.
So, okay, you've raised the bushfires, and you live in Queanbeyan. So where were you when the bushfires hit in Canberra?
I was living in Canberra. I was living in Aranda, near Belconnen, sort of north side of Canberra. Wasn't directly impacted by the bushfires, but I mean, at that time, it was like hell. It was like the apocalypse. You know, everywhere there was just, the sky was black, the sun was lipstick red. You know, you look around and there was just ash falling from the sky, sirens everywhere. And I remember very vividly my mate and I in Aranda, we hosed down the roof and kind of filled up all the gutters with water. And then we cooked a lasagna and sat on the roof watching all the different choppers passing by with all these weird names like Elvis and whatnot, and they were carrying all the water to dump on the bushfires. And then I was tutoring a kid in English who lived in this suburb that was directly affected, where I think, you know, something like 200 or 300 houses had burnt down. And it really was like the end of the world, seeing just this carnage everywhere. And I'll never forget it. And I just, at the time, felt relieved that my mum's house and that house I was living in wasn't affected, but also saw all this compassion that came out in Canberra that's considered to be so soulless, but people, you know, were all of a sudden showing this compassion. But then I sort of thought to myself also, why is it that it's only when such a cataclysmic event happens that there is finally compassion in Australians? And so...
Well, that's a very interesting question, and of course compassion is a very contentious issue in the political landscape at the moment, isn't it? What do you think has happened to compassion in Australian society right now?
I wish I had the answer. It just seems very strange to me that in a country that in certain ways could be so great and is getting richer and richer, somehow the wealthier we're becoming, the less compassionate we are and the less empathy we're able to show to people in need.
You've got two great blurbs on the cover. I mean, really, you couldn't ask for better endorsements than Christos Tsiolkas and Irvine Welch. So how did you get those?
I was just lucky, I guess. I knew both of those guys. Christos has been a mate of mine for quite a long time. We first met in Ubud, we were on a panel together, and we just got along, and I really look up to him. You know, I think he's the bravest writer working in Australia. He's really willing to go to those dark places. He doesn't claim to have the answers, but he asks really good questions. And I think that bravery was something that I hope to emulate with this book, and that sort of fearlessness and not caring what people would think and just going for the dark heart of things. And I really like that about Christos's work. And Irvine Welsh, I mean, he's been a hero of mine for a long, long time. I read Trainspotting when I was 13 years old, and it clicked something in my brain about where you could find stories of redemption, or just where you could find stories to write about.
Anywhere.
And I heard a really cool quote recently by Werner Herzog, the film director, and I really love his stuff. I sort of admire him a lot. And he was talking about how part of art is extending empathy where it has not been extended before, and looking for stories where they haven't been looked for before. And I think Irvine did that with Trainspotting. And so 17 years later, after I first read it when I was 13, being able to give him the manuscript and say, can you read this? I wrote a book as well, you know, and I was influenced by you. It was a huge moment for me. But part of Here Come the Dogs, part of the point of that is looking for stories in places where they're not looked for. And so I think that's why I got driven so mad in the writing of this book, was because I felt like I was in unmapped territory. I felt like I didn't have a compass, and I was sort of searching in the dark how to create this world and write about a world that hadn't been looked at before in Australian writing, or maybe just in writing in general.
Well, I think you found the stories and the new places. Thank you very much, Omar Musa.
Thank you for having me.